It's some kind of weird fantasy that anyone can talk to Putin and talk him out of being in this war. I just don't think that that's even on the cards. And so for Trump to say that he can end this war in one day, I don't know how he ends the war in one day because Putin's not going to end the war.
If he does if he does get in, Bill Browder, and he does end the war, will you eat your words?
Sure. I mean, I would be so happy if I was wrong. Well, first of all, I'm not sure I'd be particularly happy if he was president because there's a lot of other things that he's going to do, including when he was president before, Putin asked Trump to hand me over at the Helsinki summit, and Trump said yes. So
Right.
I'm a bit worried for my own personal safety if he becomes president. Donald Trump has been vilifying Zelensky and supporting Putin throughout this war. Donald Trump used his influence over the Republican Party to withhold $50 billion of military aid to Ukraine. And Donald Trump says that he'll end the war in one day by effectively cutting off military aid for Ukraine. And so, in that context, the fact that there are possibly, and this hasn't been proven, but there are possibly 7 secret telephone calls between Trump and Putin after Trump was president, that's a pretty scary set of facts to be looking at.
I mean, is it, again, we're just speculating here, but the fact that he has a, inverted commas, good working relationship with President Putin, he may be able to negotiate a peace that no one else has been able to.
Well, I don't think that that's in any way realistic. Putin has launched this war as a war in order to stay in power. It's a typical Machiavellian war where he's worried about his own people being angry with him. And so, what better way to avoid that than to create a foreign enemy and start a war? That's what this war is about. And so, it's some kind of weird fantasy that anyone can talk to Putin and talk him out of being in this war. I just don't think that that's even on the cards. And so for Trump to say that he can end this war in one day, I don't know how he ends the war in one day because Putin's not going to end the war.
If he does if he does get in, Bill Browder, and he does end the war, will you eat your words?
Sure. I mean, I would be so happy if I was wrong. Well, first of all, I'm not sure I'd be particularly happy if he was president because there's a lot of other things that he's going to do, including when he was president before, Putin asked Trump to hand me over at the Helsinki summit, and Trump said yes. So
Right.
I'm a bit worried for my own personal safety if he becomes president.
Well, that's a very fair point. What do you actually think their relationship? Let's just say that Donald Trump wins the election, he gets into the White House, starts the job in earnest in January. What do you think we might actually see? Do you think that we would see any kind of actual on-camera meeting with the two?
I have no idea logistically what will happen, but what I can say is that you'll see Trump cutting off immediately U.S. military aid for Ukraine, which is vital for Ukrainians to keep Russia from succeeding in their invasion. And at that point, I think that Ukraine is facing an absolute disaster. And so are we as supporters of Ukraine, because what are we going to do? Double our military aid to Ukraine to make up for the American shortfall? Can we afford that? I mean, all the talk about winter fuel aid, and we're going to double our funding for Ukraine. I don't think that's going to happen. And so so if Putin succeeds in getting Ukraine, that's not the end of the story. Then he says to himself, I wonder if this NATO thing is real. I wonder if NATO would really defend Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Let's give it a try and see what happens, because I don't think that they will. And then we're in a real world of trouble.
Well, there are many, many interesting questions to answer. Of course, we don't know until the result of the election. Bill Browder, thank you for talking to us. He is the author of Red Notice: How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy.
9-4.
Well, let's talk to Jan Halper-Hayes, former advisor to President Trump's transition team and a former world vice president of Republicans overseas. Good evening to you, Jan.
Good evening to you. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us. What do you make of these claims in Bob Woodward's new book?
Well, I don't have an enormous amount of respect for Woodward these days, but let's just take what he's claiming And what's so awful about it? The fact is that if anyone thinks that people in power or at high levels don't do things for one another, then they're fooling themselves. And the fact is that just because a certain group of Americans think that Russia is our adversary, Trump, he went to North Korea. He has a relationship with Putin. I mean, you think about that press conference they had together when the soccer ball, or the football, as we say over here, was passed to him, and he said, "The ball's in your court now." They have a very good working relationship, and that's what this world needs is peace, not all this fighting.
This book apparently claims that during the height of the pandemic, Donald Trump sent a consignment of COVID tests for Putin's personal use, and both men agreed to keep the shipment a secret to avoid a backlash. Was that a rather strange move in the middle of the pandemic?
No, it wasn't a strange move, and the actual move of doing something like that, who someone is your colleague, your friend, someone who you have a business or political relationship with, this is done all the time. All the time. And we know it, even though it doesn't get reported, even though it's sensationalized and, oh, this should be thought of as horrible. There was nothing horrible about it.
Uh, Trump, of course, didn't in any way cooperate with this book or grant any access. But I mean, Bob Woodward, who was responsible for the Watergate, uncovering the Watergate scandal, is a pretty highly respected journalist in the United States. Are you worried about the damage that this could do to Trump's reputation?
No, nothing does damage to his reputation as much as they try. No, 2 impeachments, 2 assassination attempts, Russia hoax. Should I continue on the list? Nothing. It's only increased the respect people have for him and his popularity. I mean, they keep trying all ways they're throwing. But, what people need to think about is what other public person that you know could take that much flack, those false legal lawsuits against him, and everything else, and still, one, not age. Just look at the pictures of any president when he went in and when he left, and stay committed to what he wants to do for the country. I don't know any other public person who could withstand 9 years of the kind of bashing that the media and other political adversaries have tried to throw on him.
President Trump, of course, has made no secret of his admiration for President Putin as a strong leader. And we have had those investigations, haven't we, with the US intelligence agencies finding that Moscow did intervene to try to help Donald Trump, both in 2016 and in 2020.
That's a claim. That's a claim, and we don't know that for sure. Just as much as we don't know for sure if it was a fraudulent election or not. Just as much as we don't know if China interfered. Nothing has really been confirmed about any of it.
So, do you don't accept then that this book and these latest revelations about all the contacts and the phone calls, you don't think that that will affect the level of support that he has in this presidential race?
No, 2 things. One is that under Obama's administration in 1948, there was the Smith-Mundt Act, and that was you could not provide any propaganda to American citizens. You could only do propaganda overseas. And then Obama changed it with H.R. 5736. It was Modernization Act, which basically gave, although if you fact check it, they might claim not the media, but the media ended up agreeing with it, that you didn't have to cite sources. You didn't have to provide any of that, and that we have an enormous amount of propaganda. We don't get both sides of a story anymore. And Bob Woodward has been trying to stay relevant for years. I give him and Bernstein an enormous amount of credit for Watergate. Um, And, the Washington Post keeps him around and, he speaks and, he's a senior member and we say he's a very revered person. But what has he really reported that could be substantiated? That's what I want.
Donald Trump has said on many occasions that he would resolve the war in Ukraine in 24 hours if he does become president again. What do you think that would mean? I mean, do you think that he would envisage allowing Russia to keep some of the territory that it has seized from Ukraine?
Well, I can't speak to that because I don't know what would be involved in the negotiations. But what I do know is he would make people sit down and work it out. I mean, the fact is that our good old Boris Johnson went over at Biden's request and told Zelensky not to have a peace agreement. I mean, this is a NATO thing. This is all of the military industrial complex that wants us in wars because guess who makes money? They do. And we really need to look at that because if they ask the people of the UK, if they ask the people of Ukraine or Russia or America, none of us want to be in wars. We're done with those.
And clearly the presidential race appears to be very close indeed. The polls move a point or two depending on which one you look at. Do you think any of this, the war in Ukraine, Donald Trump's relationship with President Putin, is that what is going to swing this race, do you think?
No, not at all. Not at all. And the other thing is, think about the polls of 2016. They said he was going to lose and that Hillary had it in the bag. I don't trust the pollsters because every group with their bias hires their pollsters. And I'm not sure that they ask the most relevant questions these days, but it's not really as close. That's what the media does. They want to create division. They want to keep us in fear. They want to make us think that it's so close. But these two things, they're just distractions.
Jan Halper-Hayes, former advisor to President Trump's transition team, also former world vice president of Republicans overseas. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're listening to Times Radio. It is 16 minutes past 11. So meanwhile, with that election day in the United States only 4 weeks away, Kamala Harris has done her first live interview with ABC's The View. She was grilled on immigration, usually a weak issue for the Democrats, and she blamed Donald Trump for problems at the border.
A bipartisan group of members of the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members, work together with our support to craft the most serious and strong border security bill we've seen in years. Yes. Donald Trump got word of it and told them don't put the bill up for a vote because he didn't want a solution because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. So then we had to do, in addition to what we've done since day one in trying to strengthen the border, we took further action in terms of executive action. We have seen illegal immigration reduced by half, the intake of fentanyl reduced by half. But ultimately, if we want a real fix to this, Congress has to act.
Yeah. Well, that was Kamala Harris in her interview with ABC. Let's speak to Richard Goodstein, Democratic strategist, a former advisor to both Bill and Hillary Clinton. Good evening to you, Richard.
Thanks for having me. Good to talk with you.
Well, can I ask you, first of all, about these claims in this book by Bob Woodward about Donald Trump's connections with President Putin, 7 phone calls and so on. Do you think any of that matters?
Well, here's what we know. Your last guest poo-pooed this notion of Russia trying to help Trump. Here's what we know. We know in 2016, Trump's campaign manager met with a Russian spy and gave him secret polling data. And how do we know that? We actually know that from, this was Paul Manafort, from his lawyer. We know that Trump's son, his son-in-law, and Manafort met with other Russian spies and basically said, if you have dirt on Hillary, Please give it to us. And how do we know that? We know that from Donald Trump Jr.'s lawyer. We know that the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee came out with a report saying that, yes, indeed, Putin and the Russians did try to help Trump. We know that Trump said, Russia, if you can steal Hillary's emails, I'd love using stolen material. Give it to me. We heard him. Everybody heard him do that. So we don't quite know what Putin's got on him, but why else would he say, I believe Putin over my intelligence agencies, which is what he said in Helsinki in 2017?